Welcome to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Our podcast identifies issues that influence and impact the workplace and its continuing evolution, and helps answer the question on every employer's mind: how will my business be impacted? In response to the alarming rise in workplace violence, particularly in the retail industry, states have begun implementing laws requiring employers to actively address this potential threat via policies and training. On this episode of We Get Work, we unpack the different state requirements for workplace violence prevention plans and what employers can do to help keep their employees safe. Today's hosts are Tanya Mistretta, co-leader of the retail group, and Sierra Vieira, member of the firm's workplace safety and health group and principals, respectively, in the New York City and Salt Lake City offices of Jackson Lewis. They are joined today by Adrian Wood, an associate in the New Orleans office and also a member of the Workplace Safety and Health Group. Tanya, Sierra, and Adrian, the question on everyone's mind today is, what should employers consider when creating a workplace violence prevention plan, and how will that impact my business?
Thank you, Alicia, and happy to be here with Sierra and Adrian to have a engaging discussion around workplace violence and some of the challenges that a lot of our national retail clients are facing. So just to start off with that in mind, what are some of the challenges? I know we have a slew of state law developments in the workplace violence space specific to retail. What sort of challenges are you seeing in terms of workplace violence for our retail clients?
Hey, Tanya, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, workplace violence is a growing issue. We have the data from the Bureau of Labor to back that up to show, in particular, in the retail industry, in 2023 alone, there were 306 fatalities, and of that, 30% were homicides, and that's just not acceptable. Even without that data, more employees are reporting that their fears of violence. And part of that is the rise in weapons. People can now bring weapons to the grocery store in certain states. And that threat of brandishing a weapon has certainly had an effect on our employees. There's been the recent rise in the smash and grab in retail establishments. We've also seen, folks are just getting agitated and aggressive lately, and they've been taking it out on retailers, and it is a huge problem for many of our clients.
So with that in mind, what sorts of tools, tricks of the trade can we advise our clients on in terms of combating workplace violence?
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. I'm really grateful that we have so many clients that are so concerned about keeping their employees safe. They come to us and say, what can we do? The first thing we always ask our clients is, do you have a written workplace violence prevention plan? And a lot of times they say, no, what's that? And then we look to our team of subject matter experts to draft those plans for our clients. We always say, what good is a plan or a policy if there's no training in place? So we also can assist our clients with doing that training, whether we do, a nationwide training for the managers, and then they can go on and train by store basis, or we're happy to come on site and do that training. But it's very important that employees not only know their policies, but be trained on the procedures and how to put them in action.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Adrian, one of the best opportunities we have to prevent violence in the workplace is by cooperating with our employees, really engaging them to help us identify problems before they lead to serious issues. So we encourage all of our clients to actively engage with their employees to help identify potential issues and to help us identify workable solutions so that they can go to work safely each day and go home in the same condition they went to work in.
And I think that really is the goal, right? Workplace safety, making sure that our people are safe. I find a lot of people forget about the different trainings that are available, like active shooter trainings, which I know we've had more clients reach out to us requesting. So I think creativity, communication are so key. So we've talked about a few things in terms of workplace violence prevention plans. What do those really look like? What are the core pieces there that clients should strive to achieve with their plans in states, of course, where there's not specific requirements, which I know we'll definitely want to talk about as well.
Yeah, exactly, Tanya. Some states have very specific requirements of what's in that program, but really for me, it comes down to three key issues. First, we need to be identifying the hazards and the fixes for them. And creating the program is one of the best opportunities we have to do that very deep dive into a business and figure out, are there active hazards that have not been addressed yet? The next thing is, do we have procedures for how we respond to an emergency? Workplace violence can, of course, escalate to an emergency response. And along with that, what are the channels for how we report a workplace violence incident, whether or not it's ongoing or suspected to occur in the future? And then the third is, again, how do we communicate this information to our teammates? How do we train them on our policies and procedures? And how do we get them engaged in helping us create this program?
So you alluded to state requirements. Is there anything at the federal level that we need to be focusing on, or our clients need to be focusing on right now for workplace violence?
At the moment, there is no standard on the federal level. There's some guidance material on OSHA's website, but there's no actual standard that is binding on any of our clients at the federal level.
How about like just general duty clause issues that we have to be specific or aware of, or anything there?
Wow, good keywords, my friend.
What little I know about OSHA, I do not feign to be an OSHA attorney, but is there anything at the federal level we should be thinking about?
Yeah, so Fed OSHA is still using the general duty clause to address workplace violence deficiencies with employers. So yes, employers nationally still should be thinking about potential OSHA enforcement actions arising from workplace violence incidents.
Okay, so if nothing at the federal level, I know we've at least got New York, California for retail. Can we talk about some of the differences there, similarities, especially for our national employers who have clients in both states, which already California and New York, I don't have to tell you, are challenging.
Yeah, so let's talk just quickly about California's program. So, California was ahead of the game. Its workplace violence prevention program went into effect July of 2024. So, we're well past the 1 year mark of that law being in effect. We're still waiting on regulations to be issued to enforce that new law. And California's is a little unique. It applies to pretty much every employer in the state. There are some exceptions. One that's very common is for teleworking employees, but it has a huge application to retail employers in the state. Some key elements for California's requirement: we have to have a written workplace violence prevention program. It really needs to be customized to each location. Employees have to be involved in developing it, and we have to review it regularly, at least once a year. Employees are required to be trained on that program, and then retraining is required at least annually after that. We also have some record keeping obligations in California. So, workplace violence incidents need to be logged. We need to keep records of our investigations, of our hazard assessments, our corrective actions, and our training records. There are a lot of record keeping requirements that employers are needing to follow. It's a lot of fun. And Adrian can tell us a little bit about New York's requirements.
So fortunately, the New York requirements are not very different than the California ones. They definitely overlap in some areas. One of the biggest areas that they do not overlap in is who has to have these plans in place. Like California's, where it's broad, pretty much all employers need these plans. And in New York, it's very specific to retailers. And that definition is actually a very interesting one. It only applies to establishments with 10 or more employees, and they have to basically sell goods. So I think that's their way of excluding restaurants. Some of the key requirements are, like Sierra alluded to earlier, the written workplace violence prevention policy. It needs to be written. An employer cannot just go speak to their employees and tell them what to do if somebody breaks into the store. It needs to be written down. They need to be able to have access to it, the employees. included in that plan, we need to have the workplace violence risk factors. And like Sierra mentioned earlier, that's going to be very different with each different brick and mortar store. One might be in a neighborhood that might be more high crime, and so therefore that's going to be a factor. One might open really early in the morning or stay open really late at night. That's going to be a factor. The plan also needs to have prevention methods. It needs to cite the local law, and it also importantly needs an anti-retaliation statement to be clear that employees, if they report any incidents or any complaints about their safety, that they will not be retaliated against. New York, also like California, does have a model plan, but these sometimes can be very confusing for employers. So they come to us to help them draft these plans. Also, the New York plan requires training requirements, and this training's pretty thorough. It needs to be done during working hours. It needs to do an overview of the Retail Worker Safety Act requirements, the tactics for protecting against and de-escalating workplace violence, the role of supervisors and managers in the reporting and response to that, as well as active shooter procedures. The training must be upon hire as well as annually or every 2 years, depending on the size of the business. And interestingly enough, the one way that these two plans do differ is beginning January 1st, 2027, silent response buttons must be installed in New York retailers. There is an alternative to install some type of applications on an employee's phone, or they can do the personal wearable panic buttons. But New York is giving their employers a 1.5 year head start to get those in place because they are complicated and not as simple as they sound.
Yeah, I know we've seen, states issue model plans, and I know a lot of clients struggle with this, where they just take the model plan and they go, there I have it, right? But really, those model plans are just a base template, which you have to go through and fill out. And I know a lot of our Jackson Lewis attorneys are supporting in that endeavor. So we've talked about some of the similarities, some of the differences. Anything else in terms of the differences between California and New York we want to cover, or do you have any other practical takeaways before we end?
Yeah, a couple of the key differences really are the scope of who's covered by these rules. So again, California is very broad. General industry is included in this new law's requirements. And then in New York, we're looking at retail employers. So arguably that law is better crafted and tailored for the challenges that retail employers are facing. Whereas in California, employers of all shapes and sizes are being forced to fit into one standard that really does not apply very well to different types of organizations. Another difference, California is very big on stressing the requirement of having active employee involvement in developing and implementing the program. And New York does not have that same emphasis with the current version of its program. Whether that changes in the future, we don't know, but that is a very unique distinction about how the program gets developed. And to Adrian's point, California doesn't require the panic buttons that is going to be required in New York for retail employers. Whether employers in California voluntarily adopt that system will be up to each employer and what makes sense for their establishment. So I think we'll give New York's requirements a test drive and see how that works.
And that's the challenge with all of this evolving, right? As new measures and technologies come into place, then it begs the question of, is that something that falls under the general duty? Is that something that we need to, at a minimal, do to keep our employees safe? Thank you both. This was very helpful. In terms of final takeaways for our listeners, any practical advice that you would recommend employers who are concerned about workplace safety, who want to take measures to keep staff safe? Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, to go back to some of the critical elements of a workplace violence prevention program, conduct your risk assessments and address the hazards that you find. Look at your current safety protocols and think about how they can be improved. For me, safety programs are never finished. there's something that we can constantly reevaluate and improve to keep employees safe. And then make sure you're doing your regular training and keeping good documentation of your training. Adrienne, what else do you think?
I would just end with, I think employers, if you are operating in more than one state, I think you need to be vigilant in monitoring the legislation on this. We've seen a rise in workplace violence requirements in the healthcare sector, and I think the retail sector is going to be next. So I really think we need to be monitoring that on a state-by-state basis.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Adrienne. For any of our listeners who are looking for more information, please stay tuned and reach out to the Jackson Lewis attorney with whom you regularly work. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Please tune into our next program where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. We Get Work is available to stream and subscribe on your streaming platform of choice, including Apple Podcasts and YouTube. For more information on today's topic, our presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com.